Well, when we talk about cybersecurity, we're often talking about different aspects of cyber, but today I've got a very special guest, and we're going to talk about a different aspect of cybersecurity. How do we use data to govern and make better decisions in cybersecurity? Well, there's one company at the forefront of doing this. It's First Data. I've got Ken Viciana. I said it right,
You
right?
said it right. Yeah.
Yes, my Italian's coming out.
I appreciate that.
He's the Director of Information Risk Management at First Data. He's also the chairman of the Technology Association of Georgia's Data Governance Society. And you're the co-chair at Ivanta's Atlanta CDO community, right? Like
Yes.
the governance body of it?
The governing
so
body.
You're very active.
Yes, I try to be.
All about data governance.
Yep, all about data. Yep.
Today is all about data and cybersecurity. How do we get to the forefront of utilizing data that we already have to be a more secure organization? And First Data, I think you're the only First Data is one of the only companies to have a role like yours.
I'm seeing more of these types of roles opening up now, but yes, I think when I was approached about the role, it was somewhat new to me. I hadn't seen that in the market.
So when I was kind of reviewing it, I was talking to Ken Foster, great friend of ours. You work with Ken.
Yes.
And I was like, what are some unique roles that you have within First Data that help drive out and kind of separate, and you're able to use them in cyber that are different from other organizations that you haven't seen it happen?
Right.
And he was like, oh, you got to talk to Ken, the other Ken, not me, the Italian one. He goes, because what he's doing is really interesting. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So we're here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
You're inaugurating our studio,
Yep.
Our kind of new, awesome, homey feeling studio, which I think is so much better than our old one. And it's only going to get better from here. But talking to you, how did you get into cybersecurity to begin with? I mean, because data governance and cybersecurity are two things that have, it's parting the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real connection.
Yeah, so I've been in the data management space and data and analytics space for about 20 years, working primarily at financial institutions. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, companies want to organize their data. They want to repose it, manage it, make sure it's of good quality and fit for use. I've also done reporting, BI reporting, and generating analytical capabilities. Governance has been kind of an overarching theme throughout my career. So I think when people hear the word governance or data governance, they think of roadblocks, kind of slowing down innovation. They jump to regulations, right? Kind of driving things, which is one component of it.
Compliance generates security for a lot of companies. It's a checkmark V. It's the liability aspect.
That's right. But data governance, if done right, it really enables innovation. So let's kind of start with just setting a baseline, right? So governance is really, coordinating the people, the processes, and the technology to enable an organization to leverage data as an asset, right? And all companies today are trying to leverage data, to better understand their customers, to manage risk, and really to drive their business forward and to create, actionable decision-making capabilities.
Well, you think of data management, you always think of privacy, you think GDPR, right?
Yep.
You think CCPA
Mm-hmm.
next year, more or less, unless federal circumvision somehow happens this year, which I don't see happening.
Unlikely. Yeah.
I don't see it happening unless that bill from a representative from California about throwing CEOs in jail for breaches.
Right.
That's like throwing a rape victim in jail for being raped.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, I know that's a really, really bad example.
Yeah.
But when someone breaches your company, I think it's about the same thing of going through. I think psychologically, I was speaking to a professor, and he said when they speak to people post-breach, they exhibit similar symptoms to rape victims.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing my business, walking about it, when someone decided to just brutally invade my personal space and take advantage of something within me. Mm-hmm. Very bad example, because I'm very sensitive to rape victims, but it has a similar psychological effect.
It's a crime, right?
It's a crime. Yep. So let's throw the victim of the crime in jail. Well, we can just go back to an old, 14th century kind of rule of, punishing the victim again.
Right.
That got us real far then. Ken, you kind of, when you look at data governance as a whole, you kind of start first data kind of when they brought you on, this role didn't really exist. We're starting to see more companies kind of take a look at it. Do you feel like with security budgets being tight, scarce for a lot of organizations, right? How do you make a case for data governance?
Yeah, so I think, I mentioned before governance being viewed as, a roadblock, right, or unnecessary, and sometimes regulations or, issues in your shop kind of open up these roles. But, really, if you think about it, it uncovers the value of the program. So when I first got called about this role, I'd been on kind of the perimeter of security. I hadn't been embedded in a security program. I kind of viewed it's another widget that needs to be monitored and measured, right? How are you doing in your program?
Right.
If you don't have a governance focus there's really no way to quantify how the program's doing, right? From a resourcing standpoint, from technology spend, you need somebody who goes at it with that analytical lens to kind of quantify the program overall. So I think that's the value. I mean, I think one of the challenges with security is no news is good news to a certain extent, right? If you're out of the headlines and out of the news, but
for the most part,
well, but with that, you've got to quantify what could happen, right? If there was an incident. You also want to always be able to tell that story around your program and how you're doing, and data governance really helps you do that, right?
When you and I were talking before the program today, and over the last month or two that we were chatting, you kind of bring up a very valid point, which is how can you get more budget for security if you can't quantify the risk and the cost of data being taken? How do you really break that down? I mean, what's the secret sauce behind it?
So I think, and it's a little bit more of an art than a science. I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question. There's not an off-the-shelf model or solution that you just buy and plug in, and you instantly are able to quantify risk across your organization. I think a lot of companies have had companies call this group a different kind of group, but kind of a business continuity group, right? That often is quantifying risk for the company. But historically, they haven't really brought in security into the equation. So they'll think about, revenue, right, or customers and value that's coming through the company, but they're not looking at it from, So our company, we have financial applications. That's kind of how we measure risk, right? So not every application is equal, right? We may have an application that goes out to, a top retailer in the world that's driving a lot of business revenue, transactional volumes. We may have an application that's going to a small, or medium-sized business that's not driving the same value. So those aren't equal from a monetary standpoint. But with that, we want to make sure we're proactively monitoring and measuring activities in that application, and security is a key component of that. If that application goes down or is compromised, there's a large impact to our organization. So I'm helping kind of quantify and create that scoring model so that we can rank and kind of identify or quantify impact around that application. So it's kind of a fused score that brings together, revenue, transactional volumes, the type of data, but it also pulls in, vulnerabilities around that application, encryption, core security components, fusing that together to create a more holistic risk score.
You kind of to make it really kind of, I don't want to dumb it down.
Yeah.
But I think your role, when I kind of reflect on it, is what's missing for the CISOs who can't talk to the board in a business manner. Because you're able to build a business case for security using the company's data that can get through to the board at a level they understand, at a business level.
Yep.
and build the case for more money, more resources, whatever's needed. Maybe more cooperation from the peers
and I
in
think
the C-suite.
to go a little further, I mean, you said to dumb it down. I mean, I think it's really about helping the CISO tell that story, right? A lot of my roles as I've kind of navigated my career have kind of, straddled business IT,
Right.
and really helping, put it in layman's terms, right, and tell that story. You can't get all technical, right, with the executive board. They just they want to know the risk, cut and dry. But you want that to be fact based and data driven. So that's kind of the fruit of the work I'm doing. Goes into that story, right? And if it's questioned, we have a trail. We can kind of peel back the onion and kind of tell the story as to how we got to those numbers.
A lot of organizations today, I think the biggest companies in the world today are all data companies.
Yep.
It's actually quite surprising when you kind of realize that data governance and security hasn't been at the forefront of managing data for a lot of those larger companies. I mean, when you think of like the Facebook Cambridge Analytics piece of it.
Sure.
That was kind of like a data governance. That was a privacy breach more than it was a cyber breach.
Right.
But that would have been handled better had they had a better data governance strategy and policy in place. When you look back at that, U.S. Ken, you don't have to represent anyone, obviously, in your comment. Where do you feel like, what are some lessons that you saw from the Cambridge Analytics thing that kind of went into your role today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, defining what you're really trying to do with data, right? And kind of setting guardrails. In a previous role, I was kind of straddling innovation, right, and driving revenue from our data. But we would constantly have to ask that question, right? Is this, where we want our business to be, right? You really have to think about the data you're using, and you have to ask yourself, is this really the right way, especially when you're using customer data,
Right.
right? So that's where you need a solid governance program to lean on to kind of define those guardrails. And when there are ideas to kind of drive your business forward with data, you got to hit the pause button and say, is this really where we want to go? Is this the right thing to do? Revenue isn't always the answer. You need to be a trusted steward of that data, especially sensitive data.
Lots of talk about GDPR now.
Yep.
We started to see the fines kind of start to roll in the first part of this year. The California Consumer Protection Act of 2020, that's supposed to kind of take effect, I think, July 1st, 2020. So many different regulations, kind of privacy rules, and so many other kind of organizations, so many other states also kind of picking up on the California law and trying to kind of create their own. How does that play into data governance?
So it's directly tied into data governance is the short answer. In my TAG data governance group, we did a GDPR event. It was one of our most highly attended events last year. We're actually going to run one back in June. I think it's now here in the States and it's real. Last year when we were talking about it, it was more, in Europe.
Right.
But it just lends itself to having a solid data infrastructure and processes in place to manage your data, because you're going to be audited and somebody's going to be on the hook, right? If you're not taking care and proactively managing and kind of have your ducks in a row, you're going to be in trouble. So you're seeing a lot of technologies coming out as GDPR solutions,
right? And
there, there's no silver bullet there.
No,
there's always the people component and how you set things up. But you're seeing a lot of people are pushing GDPR. The consulting space. It's a necessity to kind of have that mindset where you're really managing your people, your processes, and your technology.
I'm starting to notice that more chief information security officers and more chief information officers are starting to look at data governance a little different than before. Are you seeing that shift Because are you seeing that shift more maybe locally here, or is it starting to become a national, international trend? How do you see the data governance kind of role developing?
Yeah, so one thing I have noticed I've noticed a change. I mean, you're seeing people being hired in these roles who maybe aren't the traditional hires.
Right.
Right. I've seen CISOs that are hired that don't really have a security background. They have, more of an IT data background. And for CIOs, I think security has been, one of their top priorities, just based on, keeping a company safe and kind of out of the headlines, right? You're seeing
Right.
CIOs with a heavy security focus, and governance is kind of core to that effort. Data is, what you need to manage, right? What you need to lock down, keep intruders out, keep
Right.
your infrastructure safe. So governance is a way to get there and support that, but it's also a cultural mindset for a company, right? It's like I said before, it's not just buying a technology and plugging it in. I mean, you've got to build a whole program, all your processes, and it's something that you need to nurture and continuously monitor and improve. It's not a project where you just say we have this data governance project, we go live and it goes away. I mean, it takes resources and it takes, repeatedly challenging kind of your program to keep it current.
So one of the things I've started to notice is that there are some frameworks that are starting to come around for data governance.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen these frameworks, and do you think they cover enough? Because, I mean, I've seen them where they talk about different, people in organizational body. They kind of break it down into 3 different things, which is really, you think people, process, technology,
Yep.
but this is more going like people, rules,
Right.
and processes.
Yep.
They're kind of ignoring the technology piece. Is that kind of the whole thing, is that data governance is kind of isolated from technology? It's just, hey, we're about people, processes, and rules. We're not about the technology. We don't really care for technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that mindset or how things are shifting is just that the technology landscape's moving so fast, right?
Right.
The tools, the vendors, it's constantly changing. So companies want, they want to be able to scale, right? And these tools are interchangeable at this point. Now, I will say there are tools that really help, right? If you're, you identify data governance as something you need to do, a piece of technology can help kind of jumpstart that, right? It gives you a structure. It gives you a means to kind of start to build your program. But I think it's underestimated the effort of building a staff and that mindset, because governance spans across a company, right? It's not really one business unit.
It's
right?
not just cybersecurity.
Exactly.
It's so much more.
It's
it
so much more.
encompasses
And you got to
everything.
bring it together, right?
Right.
It's so there's a heavy, ability to work across an organization is critical. You've got to have that influence and build those relationships. And you're always selling it, because if you think about it, if I'm working with the technology team, right, I'm trying to get them to buy into governance, technology is really their day job, right? They're not thinking about governance.
Correct.
Now, the good thing is there's a lot of good governance activities going on in an organization that just aren't identified as governance, right?
Right.
So a lot of companies do governance. They might just they might not call it that, right? And I think having a data governance person, actually a staff, kind of helps formalize that and bring that together to kind of define the governance activities that are happening and manage it. And then, you always want to be speaking from a fact base. So pulling the data behind it, the metrics, the analytics, you want to trend it, track it, monitor it, and tell that story. I think that's critical.
There's when you speak of people in organizational bodies, in a lot of organizations, I think we're starting to see a trend in security shift, right? Mm-hmm. Where now you're seeing the CISO put different people in roles within different units, right? So the CTO's got kind of a security specialist on his team that's kind of helping him run the projects and address security from the get-go.
Yep.
The CIO, not only does he have the CISO, but he's also got someone kind of helping him when it comes to identifying third-party risks and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that also go to the customer service side of the business, the sales and marketing side of the business, especially with a lot of the ad spies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. with some of the adware and ad specific things that go on. Do you think that data governance is going to end up being kind of like its own team where, you've got the head, but then he's got octopus arms? Because that's, to me, the CISO now, right?
Yeah.
The modern CISO is the octopus. He's got implants in different departments. You're not behind the 8 ball anymore. You're in front of the 8 ball, right? And you're doing that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's going to be the case with data governance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different at different organizations, the organizational structure. I think banks, and I've been through the banking space, they tend to have a chief data office, and they have, somebody who's in charge of data governance, and then, that group is solely looking at data governance across the organization and the business units. In my current role, we kind of have some data folks scattered throughout the organization. So I'm trying to help bring those folks together and create a forum where we can collaborate and, make sure we're aligned in our efforts. But yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your business and your org structure. I mean, if you're kind of a startup, it's a lot easier because you kind of can define what you want to be, right? Larger companies have grown a lot through M&A, right? So you acquire a company, you acquire their people, their technology, you try to integrate things and create standards. But there's challenges, especially with larger companies.
You guys are about to go through that with the First Data and the Fiserv.
Yep.
M&A, which hasn't been approved yet,
right,
technically, until maybe later this year.
Yes.
But do you feel like data governance can play a central role in making an M&A really smooth with two very large organizations kind of coming together?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if everything goes through, right, there's a large integration that needs to happen.
Right.
And I think governance can play a key role there.
In kind of managing M&A, because, I mean, there's been a lot of companies that have grown through M&A that have later experienced the kind of, breaches or other things that have happened because of it. And then you kind of look back at it and you go, oh, well, if they would have only done these specific things during M&A, maybe these things wouldn't have happened. Do you feel like that's a lesson that's being learned in 2019 as people kind of reflect on some of the past M&A? I mean, the Marriott Starwood Sheridan thing was just a classic of, hey, we did an M&A, we tried to combine all systems, but one system was corrupted already. No one bothered to really check it. They just hooked it onto the network, and the hackers had just, you name it. Do you feel like organizations are learning from that and approaching data governance differently, or do you feel like that's still something you have to advocate and keep preaching on to kind of continue that awareness so that people in M&A start to realize, hey, we got to have some data governance in place to realize how we get this all done, not only on budget, but also secure, but also kind of integrating data correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Marriott Starwood, M&A is a great example.
Right.
I think as companies do these assessments for M&A up front, they're asking those questions about, how you store your data, how you manage it, where you manage it, where's your PII, your PCI data, really identifying sensitive information and how it's protected. But there is a constant awareness and training component of all this, but I think we are learning from the past, right? We don't want history to repeat itself in these large deals. So you learn and you try to apply lessons learned and improve things. So I think we're getting better on the M&A space, but it's still case by case basis.
You're really active in the Atlanta data governance cyberspace. I mean, you're everywhere. I mean, honestly, like your social media presence is insane.
Thank you.
Atlanta is now home to two major M&As. I mean, Atlanta's going to lose SunTrust to Charlotte.
Yeah.
Which is a very kind of big blow to Atlanta.
It is sad for Atlanta.
But you guys, Fiserv and First Data, are coming together, and all indications are that no one's going anywhere. That First Data is still here. Fiserv is 10 minutes from where we're at right now.
Right up the road. Yeah.
Right up the road.
Yeah.
And so, are you starting to see this discussion become more prevalent in Atlanta simply because of these kind of like M&As that are happening right now, which are major M&As, I mean, these are huge. I mean, First Data, Fiserv, yes. SunTrust and BB&T, I think, was kind of the one that...
Yeah, it was a big one. Yeah.
It was a really big one, and
Yeah.
I'm sure your phone blew up like mine did, 6
It did.
a.m. that morning.
I'm in Atlanta because SunTrust brought me down here, originally. So I spent about 4 years there myself and got a lot of roots there. So that was big news for sure.
Do you feel like as kind of that progresses through, data governance is going to become more central? Atlanta will lead that conversation on a national stage simply because of all these different M&As that are happening here that involve data-based companies?
Yeah, it seems like M&A comes in cycles, right? And I think we're at the start of a very large M&A cycle. And I think it's often driven, companies have revenue expectations, right? And the way the market's kind of risen for about a decade now,
right?
Those expectations are getting more and more challenging for companies to meet. So these M&As, they present savings in technology, large technology savings. I mean, if you think about the BB&T SunTrust merger, both of these large banks have very large technology stacks and spends, right? And if they can kind of bring those together, you just think about the savings in technology. It's amazing. There's also large real estate savings, right?
Insane.
So, I think M&As like this, we're going through a cycle now where it's going to be, somewhat the norm. But to your point, I think governance is even more and more important to rationalize kind of, the data infrastructures of different organizations and how you integrate them and bring them together, right?
Yeah.
I think that's going to become a pretty key role, data integration, which governance would have oversight of.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take a quick 1-minute break here for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. The CyberHub Engage podcast is sponsored by CyberHub Academy. Now, people have been asking me, what is CyberHub Academy? Well, just for the sake of full disclosure, before I get into it, I am a part of CyberHub Academy. My partners there have supported my vision for CyberHub Engage in return for their sponsorship. But they are cyber business operation experts, and that means that they help any size business operationalize cybersecurity, whether it be identifying threats, solving issues and problems, developing incident response plans, practicing incident response through tabletop exercises, and identifying different methods to maximize and really bring value out of your cybersecurity budget. We all know that cybersecurity budgets are tight, and it typically doesn't start raining money until something happens. Well, these are the guys to help you make sure that if, God forbid, something does happen, you would have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. Make sure to support them and check them out, cyberhubacademy.com. Ken, kind of getting to that. Next week, we're hosting a meetup, which you were supposed to we were hoping you would speak at. It's our first CyberHub Engage meetup being hosted by Cabbage. But I think what would be really cool is, kind of throwing out an idea here in the middle of the show, but we should do like a data governance and M&A meetup.
Yeah.
Would be
absolutely.
delighted in the kind of like putting it on, hosting it.
That'd be great.
Maybe having you on, maybe we get, First Data to host it, or we can do it at SunTrust Park or something and get the right people involved and kind of have that discussion. I think here regionally, I think that's a great discussion to have. Mm-hmm. Micah, we should like definitely write that down. That should be our next meetup.
All right.
Because one of our goals in our meetups, right, is to kind of drive a discussion around specific topics that are very important that are going to. We want to lead the discussion at CyberHub Engage. We just do. That's the point of having you here. Mm-hmm. That's the point of doing this podcast. Is we want to lead a discussion that really a lot of people aren't really thinking about, but it needs to be brought to their awareness, and people need to look at it kind of a little differently. But getting back to our questions here, there's a lot of models out there. Of the cost of a breach, right? Mm-hmm. We've heard the kind of Equifax models. We've heard the different models that are out there. Data governance can really break that down and give the actual cost of a breach. Mm-hmm. Are these numbers even anywhere near what we're hearing? Are numbers worse than they are and just being underestimated?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope there with the numbers. I mean, I think one of the benefits in this day and age is companies need to publicly disclose cost of a breach. So, you can go to the Equifax, annual report or, quarterly report, and there'll be, a blurb and numbers around the cost associated with the breach. The challenge there is the insurance component. Right?
I'm going to stop you real quick because we've seen it. We've seen it. We're doing our series of Beyond the Breach.
Yeah.
I've looked through about 5 or 6 companies' annual reports. They mask the real cost of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's masked in so many different categories that it's very difficult.
It is difficult sometimes
to really evaluate
yes.
the cost.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good point. I mean, what's in the annual report, quarterly report, sometimes it's not completely clear as to what that number is associated with, right? Or it might be bucketed with other, financials.
If their marketing spend went up by $55 million,
right?
No one
they don't
associates that with the breach.
That's right.
But your marketing spend just went up $55 million a year.
Right.
What's that for? I mean, there was a survey that was done in the healthcare industry on hospitals, and it was measuring the effects of a breach or a ransomware attack on a hospital. And the number was that most hospitals spend 82% more on marketing in the 18 months following a breach being exposed, and trying to regain the trust of their brand, than a normal hospital who hasn't been breached.
And I think that's a normal reaction to a breach at companies, right? It's you want to retain your current customer base. You want to let them know that everything's okay. We're working diligently to make things better, right? And regain that trust, right? So yeah, I think marketing spend is a great example of what can go up, and maybe that's not listed in an annual report as breach related.
No, I mean there's just so much of that. But do you feel like, in your personal opinion, and we're not going to pin it on any one company, what do you feel like is the average cost for a medium-sized organization to deal with a breach? If you would pin a ballpark figure range, what would you say that is?
It's a good question. I mean, it depends. I mean, I don't have a clear number to throw out there. It kind of depends on the company and the situation. I don't know that there's an overarching number, but it's going to be in the millions of dollars range.
So the Cambridge Analytics privacy debacle that happened at Facebook.
Yeah.
So I studied the Facebook kind of model responding to that.
Yeah.
We looked at their annual reports. And then I looked over the last 6 months to see what they've done. So if we just take Mark Zuckerberg going to the Hill to explain Cambridge Analytics, the cost of that alone for Facebook was over $50 million. Yeah. That's legal fees. That's preparation. That's depositions. That's the staff that had to work to
get Zuckerberg ready. Z-Man, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just for him being subpoenaed to go testify in front of Congress and Senate.
It was a big deal.
On the
in
Hill.
Front of the Senate, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you think of the ads that they so I've never seen a Facebook ad before in my life. Never seen it. Facebook doesn't need TV ads.
Right.
They had TV ads running, connecting people. Facebook connecting people, getting you that. I mean, they were paying millions and millions of dollars to do that. I mean, the Cambridge Analytics thing, just basically just looking at it from a...
Again, they want to set their customer base at ease that,
that was over $100 million for them, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have the hard number. Like I said, they mask it so well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have a team that's in charge of masking it so shareholders don't panic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when companies report on a breach, I mean, there's an equation that they're kind of coming up with certain numbers, right? So if you think about number of records, right, or number of sensitive records, and there's a cost associated with that, right? And then they multiply that by how many records were compromised, right? I don't think there's a perfect way to do this. Like I said, it's a little bit more of an art than a science. Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
I feel like with time and as you study more and more and more, a different breach in a different financial institution or a healthcare facility or so forth. I mean, people take what you buy on the dark web and use that kind of as a tag of what it costs, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's what a hacker could possibly make off of it.
Yeah. Well, I think too, in this day and age, consumers are becoming more and more numb to a breach announcement, right? They're not reacting. They're not freaked out. It's become kind of the norm, right? But it's now more and more around. They want to know, when did you identify or detect kind of, the intrusion, and how long did it take you to remediate? Like in the Marriott example, it was a long time. I think that's when people get really, really freaked out, right? When it's like, well, why did it take you 6 months or a year to do anything?
You know how long it took JP Morgan to figure out that they were breached in 2014? 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years of someone just siphoning off data.
Yep. And I think, that correlates again with governance, which can help kind of set those alerts, alarms, kind of identify something sooner.
Right.
The fact is they didn't know, right? There wasn't transparency, or they weren't proactively, they didn't have the right monitoring in place to identify something sooner, right?
Correct. I mean, JP Morgan was spending $250 million a year on security in 2012, 13, and 14.
Right.
I mean, that's no small chunk of change.
Yeah.
That's more than, I think, 10 companies combined security budgets in most cases, and now they're spending around 500, almost 600 million a year on security. They have probably one of the best security programs out in the financial industry. Mm-hmm. But how does that play into the human aspect? How does data governance really address? Because we all know that the pitfall, you can have the best security program in the world, and you can have Bob. And we're going to call him Bob for the sake of... And Bob likes to click on an email that says, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince, and I will give you $10 million.
We've all gotten that email.
We've all gotten that email from the Nigerian prince.
Yep.
How do you get Bob to stop clicking? And how does data governance play into that?
Yeah, so that's another area, my role in governance has taken, is we're trying to really push internal education, right? So we have a formal phishing program, right? And I'm generating the metrics behind that, right? And when we see issues, there's training, right? And in theory, it's kind of like, we roll out the phishing program, Bob clicks on something he shouldn't. There's got to be some training to Bob, right? So that he knows not to do it again. And then it's rolling out the program again and seeing, did Bob learn from the last time, right? So, I mean, I think it's kind of circular. It's kind of rolling out the phishing program, monitoring it, but then there's education and training off of it. I think a lot of companies are spending more time on that because they recognize the weakness there, right?
When you do a phishing when you do a phishing test in your company, are you measuring the people who report the phishing, meaning the people who click the link? So when people click the link, because I have this whole debate with phishing companies that kind of facilitate the phishing test, where it takes you to a landing page after you click a link and it said, busted. I actually despise that method. I don't think it educates. I think it creates panic.
It does. Yeah.
I like the idea of take them to a website that looks like a normal website and see if they report the fact that they just clicked on a suspicious link. Because I think that's where the education really breaks down.
Yeah, and we are monitoring that. So, when we send out a phishing email, and hopefully, all of our employees aren't listening to this. So
I hope they are. Listener push.
Yeah. So basically, if you get a phishing email and you recognize it as being a fraudulent type of scenario, we do have a button to report it, right? So we are monitoring that. Who's actually being the good guys who are reporting this information, which it's an important metric to capture.
I think that's really. I was at a electronic crime task force meeting last year with Kevin Walsh. And Kevin, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we got a presentation from a very big company here who I'll keep unnamed for the sake of purposes because what we went through was really kind of classified and they shared a lot of matrix with us.
Yeah.
But the guy who was in charge of phishing at the company essentially said, we got only 10% of our company to fall for the phishing. And he goes, that's a great metrics. He goes, I went to my bosses. I was so psyched.
Right.
And they go, so we're a company of, let's say, 5,000 people. So you want to tell me 500 people still click the link? Well, that's not a good number.
Right.
And my follow-up to that was, well, how many of those 500 actually reported the fact that they clicked on? Because the real number is if 300 right away realized that, oh, shoot, I just clicked on the bad link. Let me call the IT helpline. Let me call the help desk. Let me report it right away.
What was the follow through? Right.
What was the follow through of those people? Because that's the real number. So if it's 200 people, those 200 people need to be educated. The other 300 clicked the link, realized they made a mistake, and immediately reported it. Yeah. They don't need to go through another training.
And that's a good example, James. I mean, that's a lot of, what I've been doing with my role is you really got to think about what's the right measure, right? What are you really trying to capture? Where's their value?
Right.
Because I think before they kind of built this role, we had more traditional operational metrics, right? Just counts, volumes of activities. And, you look at all these graphs and reports and you're like, what are you doing with this information, right? What problem are you trying to solve? And I think that's where they hired me to kind of take it to the next level and say, how do you interpret this and drive decision-making and behavior, right?
Right.
But to your point, it's like defining the right metric is critical. If you're measuring the wrong thing, it tells the wrong story.
I think oftentimes we see this, and I think one of the reasons I wanted you on the show and I wanted to kind of have this conversation with you is because I believe that other CISOs and CIOs that listen to our show, really, I'm trying to make a case for data governance for them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's CISOs and they kind of go in brackets, and you said it. You're starting to see CISOs that come from CTO.
Yeah, you get a technology guy,
a guy who becomes a security guy who has no idea what security is all about.
Sure.
And is trying to learn security on the job, which I feel like all of within itself is already a false decision being made by the board to put this person in that role. But I also understand you can't always find the right security people to fill a role, right?
Yeah.
There is a shortage today.
There is. It's a hot market out there for sure.
It is. Yeah. And when you're a chief information security officer, you get about 2 job offers a week. Right. Hey, jump ship, come here. We'll pay you more, right? And a lot of it has to do with, you don't want to really be jumping ship every 2 to 3 months. But the idea of data governance and really for the CISO role is I look at the CISOs who are great security guys, brilliant in what they do, have a great holistic approach. They're just really bad. They just need so much help in building the business case to get it across to the CEO, to the board, to the CFO. That's where your role becomes
That's where
handy.
Governance is key.
Right. That's
the
business case. Here's your one pager. Here's the facts.
So it's funny because before I came into the security group specifically, I played this role with data scientists, right? Data scientists, can be doing the best work possible, but they have trouble communicating the value. Right. You need somebody who can understand the details and kind of turn that into, the story. What does it really mean? Right. What does it mean? Why is it important? And what's actionable? What do I do off of this information? Right. If you can't answer those questions, then you're measuring the wrong thing.
One of the very interesting reads I was having about data governance was the fact that it really is kind of the ultimate exercise in how to manage your data, how to build roles, and how to manage your decision-making capabilities in those matters. Do you feel like as security folks start to look at data more under the microscopic eye of specific data that's really, really crucial for the success of an organization, do you feel like the decision-making process can really change, the discussion can really be a better, more educated, more business-focused discussion around security rather than the traditional kind of, I call it the FUD effect of security?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, with this type of role I'm in, and like I've said, I've seen more of these types of roles opening up. I think companies before shot from the hip a little bit more, where they'd have these scorecards that are, red, yellow, green, and then, a CISO would hone in on red and be like, wow, I'm red. What does that really mean? And, you get a lot of looks like, yeah, we're in bad shape there. There's something we have to do, but they can't really quantify it, right? So being more precise is what this governance function will do. Help them be more precise around their risks and really drive action, whether it's, I need to reallocate resources or I need to hire more resources or, we have a technology gap here. These are all things that a data governance program can enable.
When you think of a CISO's decision-making capabilities as they build kind of their technology and vendor pipeline under budget for the next year or two, and I'm making the case for you here, but
Yeah.
Really, to me, data governance becomes the ultimate kind of, hey, we don't need this because we already have this, and if we just implement this a little bit better, we can use that money elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think when you and I were talking, you said, hey, that's one of the things we actually evaluate is what technologies do we have in security, how are they implemented, and then how can we really...
How effective are they, right? Maybe you're spending a ton of money on a technology and it's really not working well, but nobody has taken the time to measure that.
To evaluate it.
Exactly.
And I think that's a real big challenge in security is, you're starting to see it too. I mean, in a few weeks, we're going to be at RSA.
Yep.
And as much as I love RSA, I was chatting with a friend of mine in Colorado who reminds me of Ken Foster in a lot of ways. Simply, the beard game is strong.
The beard is strong, yeah.
The beard is strong.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how, you go to RSA, you see 2,000 cyber vendors there.
It's overwhelming, right? It's
and everyone's throwing out buzz and keywords, machine learning, AI, phishing, you name it, automation, cloud security, you name it, it's all there. But there isn't a real way to measure an effectiveness of a product. And I think a lot of it has to do with how, a CISO builds his infrastructure, all these different roles that all these different things that play a very significant role in cybersecurity, but data governance also addresses a lot of that. And when people go to RSA, I feel like a lot of times they're just looking for the great shiny object.
Right? Yeah.
They're not really looking at it in depth. And I also feel like vendors waste a lot of money sometimes going to something where they have no potential of acquiring anything.
Yeah.
But they're just there because they're trying to be a shiny object and they don't understand.
They have to be there, right? It's the big show. They feel like they need to have a booth there.
We're going because the state of Georgia essentially said, hey, come broadcast from our booth.
Yeah.
Last year I went and I left after a day and a half. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm from
San
Francisco.
Okay.
Well, I'm from San Francisco. So for me, it was just like, hey,
it's fine.
I'm going to go eat. I'm going to go to my favorite places. I'm going to go see my family. That's what I'm going to go do. I'm really going to go to the show for about a day and a half, and then I'm leaving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that was my biggest challenge was that piece. Have you been to RSA before?
I haven't gone to RSA before, no.
When you go to cyber shows, what are some of the cybersecurity? I mean, you and I were just talking about it before we started. Hey, cybersecurity conferences in Atlanta, ton of them, one a week.
One a week.
Yeah. Every week,
yeah.
One a week. All the same.
Mm-hmm.
What stands out for you when it comes to conferences or where you spend your time?
I mean, when I choose to go to a conference, there's a few factors I have in mind. I mean, the networking component is always important to me, right? Especially here in Atlanta. I think I've spent a lot of time just focusing on my network, and it's been really valuable throughout my career. But the content, the speakers, you don't want to be going to events where it's a repeat every week, right? I think what you guys are doing a good job of. It's kind of spicing it up, bringing new ideas and innovation to that area. You want to learn something tangible that you can bring back, but there's also just collaboration with your peers, right? That's been the most valuable to me where, if I have an issue or a question, I have kind of a bench of people I can reach out to personally, say, hey, have you ever seen this before? How'd you attack this problem? And that's why the Atlanta community is fantastic. I mean, there's stuff every week. You've just got to pick and choose or it'll swallow you up,
I mean, I think next week we have 3 back-to-back cyber events.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
Back-to-back.
Yeah, I don't generally don't sign up for the 3 back-to-backs, but
I mean, it's insane. I find it, when you speak to other ecosystems, you see a little bit more, I want to say, a better united front in dealing with cyber. So a lot of the different bodies come together and go, hey, let's do something that really addresses everyone in one fell swoop.
And there are different types of events. I mean, I think you see a lot more, being the event calendar is so challenging in Atlanta, you see a lot of just dinner events, right? Which are easier for execs to get to because you don't have to, be out of the office
all day.
I have trouble sitting through the, 3-day or week-long conference setting. It's just too much at this point.
I think there's when you go to a 3-day conference, I think the expectation is always when you go to something like RSA, you typically look at a track
Right.
group of speakers you
You
want to see.
pick and choose what you want to see. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you go, hey, I'm going to fly in Tuesday morning. I'm going to leave Wednesday night. I'm going to go see these 4 speakers. I'm going to take these 7, 8, 10 meetings, and I'm going to let these 2 guys buy me dinner because it's San Francisco and shit, it's expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. They'll get you. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, so you kind of see that when you look, you kind of brought up a very good point, which is, you kind of see the Atlanta community really come together. You see there's a lot of support from peers here. Do you get the same feedback from outside of Atlanta?
I don't hear as much in other communities, and it's, when I go to events, in different regions, I don't think they have the same communities we have. I think some do, but especially in the fintech space here, it's booming right now. Atlanta is definitely the place to be for fintech.
Finally, we'll kind of wrap this up. We are getting a bit short on time here. When you look at data governance as an overall grand scheme in your career, where do you really see yourself in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where do you see data governance be in 2, 5, 10 years going from here on out?
Yeah, so if you asked me this question a couple of years ago, I was very clearly focused on a chief data officer role. That's really what I wanted to get into, and I think that's still of interest and a possibility. But I think now that I've been embedded in the security space, I have a lot of technology experience. I mean, I think the CISO or CIO role would also be of interest in the future. So that I think I've rounded myself out now where those types of roles would be of interest. And the C-suite's always changing, right? The landscape.
Right.
So now the CISO in a lot of organizations has a seat at the table, right? Depends on the org structures, but I think those are roles that are more of interest now. Whereas before I had my blinders on for the CDO role, which isn't as common in a lot of organizations. Not every organization has a chief data officer.
They don't, and the ones that do, typically the CDO is just there to manage data,
right?
And typically doesn't have a seat at the table,
right?
And he's just there for the sake of telling the board we have someone doing a job,
right?
But really, he, it's kind of, I always say it's like the checkmark CISO role.
Yep.
They hire someone.
Which is the challenge, because, if you go into one of those roles, you want to make sure that you're going to be put in a position to succeed, right? And the org structure lends itself to that, and you're not just checking the box.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
This has been really awesome.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I'll say thanks. If you're watching, so data governance is going to be a hot topic for us in 2019 as the show kind of progresses. I am serious. We are going to talk to Ken here after we get offline and try to put something together later in the year to do a kind of a data governance meetup on cyber, hopefully together, or do something along those lines. But thanks for listening. Ken, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciated it.
You're listening and watching to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar. I am your host. Thanks for listening. And here's a brief message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back after that message. The CyberHub Engage podcast is sponsored by CyberHub Academy. Now, people have been asking me, what is CyberHub Academy? Well, just for the sake of full disclosure, before I get into it, I am a part of CyberHub Academy. My partners there have supported my vision for CyberHub Engage in return for their sponsorship. But they are cyber business operation experts, and that means that they help any size business operationalize cybersecurity, whether it be identifying threats, solving issues and problems, developing incident response plans, practicing incident response through tabletop exercises, and identifying different methods to maximize and really bring value out of your cybersecurity budget. We all know that cybersecurity budgets are tight, and it typically doesn't start raining money until something happens. Well, these are the guys to help you make sure that if, God forbid, something does happen, you would have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. Make sure to support them and check them out, cyberhubacademy.com.